because, I think when everyone thinks about budgeting, this is their main concern is how is it going to affect my spending?
If you're with your friends and you're like, hey, let's go visit so-and-so, there's a financial component to that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing is to realize someone listening today may start in a certain place, but just give yourself the ability to flex and move as life changes.
The benefit of having the 5 different jars to your advantage.
Yes.
Not all the money that you're spending has to come out of your spending jar. All right, so we're back here again today. We talked last week about the 5 jars and how you can use that as a budgeting method. Today we're going to talk about the spending jar specifically. We're going to go in through the next few weeks and go into each jar and talk about it specifically. But just to kind of review about what the 5 jars is.
Yeah.
So basically it's a method of splitting up your income and your finances into 5 different categories. One is spending, one is savings, one is investment, one is personal or professional development, whichever one you want to do. And then one is your generosity or giving jar.
Yeah.
And so, we talked about that, but let's start out talking about the spending jar because, I think when everyone thinks about budgeting, this is their main concern is how is it going to affect my spending?
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah. In fact, I've heard a lot of people say, budgeting sucks.
Yep.
Right?
Sure does.
The life sucker out of having fun, or the people think, this is the part where, I get strangled into, or pigeonholed into something that maybe, people have a tough time navigating through or feeling comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think a lot of the time people find budgeting to be some sort of like buzzkill.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we want to talk about how like budgeting specifically in the spending jar, how to give your money purpose without sucking the fun out of life, because that's not what budgeting is about.
Right.
Budgeting is about giving your money purpose and thinking more so about your future while also not having an absolutely miserable, no fun life. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So another way we put it too is that every dollar that comes in should have some sort of a job that it's doing. And so this is kind of like, okay, so which dollars are we giving this job to?
Yeah, so true. So one thing that, it might seem really obvious when you say it, but if you don't really say it and admit it to yourself, you might not live like it.
Okay.
It was a reality of your life. But almost every single decision you make in your life has some sort of financial impact.
Exactly.
Right?
That's very true.
There's some sort of financial component to almost every decision you make in your life, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's going out to dinner, what are you eating for dinner tonight? Sending your kids to college, or you going to college, buying a home. That one's sort of obvious, right? But, what clothes you're wearing, your subscriptions that you're paying each month, those can build up really quickly, especially if you're not paying attention to what you're subscribing to. But, getting married, that has a whole financial component too, many financial components to it. I'm sure you're very aware of this. So, what is the spending jar to you? How have you seen it shift over your life? What did it start out as, and what has it kind of become for you?
Yeah, I think several ways to answer that. So, just to kind of piggyback off of what you were just saying about most, if not all of our decisions have some sort of a financial component to it. Some of them, like you mentioned, were more obvious, like marriage or buying a home. But like if you're with your friends and you're like, hey, let's go visit so-and-so. You're going to get in your car and you're going to go there. And to do that, you're going to get in your car and you're going to use fuel to go to that house. To go visit them. There's a financial component to that decision. And
Chances
so some of them
are going to stop and get food too.
You're going to stop and get food. And so some of them are not necessarily as obvious, but if you stop and think about it, you're like, yeah, you're going to go, you're going to go and watch a movie with a friend. Well, you're going to turn lights on. You're going to put on your TV. You're maybe renting a movie, right? There's can be financial components to those kind of things. And so for me, you talked about my experience with the jar. Yes, it has changed definitely several times, several new iterations over time as life has changed and children came into the world, and as you guys were growing in different stages of your life, whether you're in sports or there's all sorts of different ways that jar continued to evolve um, over time. And that's where kind of, my gosh, it started to dawn on me, like the decisions that we're making, how much of a financial component it is to about everything we do. And that's where you can start realizing which decisions you're making during a month might be more sucking, from that spending jar more than you wanted or realized, up and above like your rent and your groceries that are more obvious that you need to take care of.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I have seen it expand and contract in that jar several times over life, just depending on the seasons we're in, for sure.
Yeah.
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 And I think that's an important thing, is to realize someone listening today may start in a certain place, but just give yourself the ability to flex and to move as life changes, because that's just life and how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You really need to have to be more so successful with your spending. You really need to have the mindset of the future. Like when you're planning your spending money, it's not just to restrict yourself. It's really to protect your future, because when you're not planning out your spending for your needs versus wants and things like this, that's when your money really starts to slip away and just like disappear, and you're like, oh man, where'd my money go?
Yeah, it's kind of like being mindful and being aware, and just not allowing it just to be a subconscious thing,
Right.
but always being on top of it.
Yeah, and that takes a level of self-control, which can be hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I would always suggest, like, you don't have to like share all your financials with somebody if you don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
but just have someone that like kind of keep you accountable,
Yeah.
in that sort of sense as well, is always just helpful, because sometimes it's hard to just like say no to like even a seemingly innocent purchase, when especially if you're in like a tighter financial situation. So,
Right.
you know, so when we're talking about the spending jar, like I mentioned some like needs versus wants.
Yeah.
Um, this is again going to be kind of subject to your situation, but you really need to take the time to look at, okay, so what are like my needs? I need to eat. So what are my groceries? Utilities, bills, things like things that you need to pay to continue living your life, right? And then wants, obviously, are things that you don't necessarily need, but those are important too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Especially, but sometimes I would say, and this goes to the personal development jar, that sometimes your wants can go more so towards the personal development jar.
Sure.
So it's kind of like using the benefit of having the 5 different jars to your advantage.
Yes.
Not all the money that you're spending has to come out of your spending jar.
Correct. That's exactly right. That's a great point. That you were just talking about groceries. Yeah, that's an expenditure every month versus like eating out. Like you were saying, maybe I want to go eat out with my friends. That's an okay desire as well. But I'm sure, as you've realized, if I go to the grocery store and spend $30,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm walking out with versus if I go
is
to
a carton of eggs.
yeah, like with my carton of eggs, and then if I go out and eat
Yep.
with a friend and spend $30, you can just the difference. Like, wow, this meal was expensive, and I had one meal versus I could go to the grocery store, spend X amount, and bring home several meals I could prepare throughout the week.
Yep.
And so just being mindful of that and saying, I'm still going to go out with my friends, but maybe I'm going to limit it to how many of those meals I have. And when that money's gone, I have to wait till next month until that money's there again. And just having that discipline,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not, but you're not necessarily denying yourself the ability to have, relationships with people and spend time with people, which is also important to health and different things.
Yeah.
At the same time, too, and this is where the nuances come in, I know there's going to be some people watching that they're in a certain phase of life where they're like, I shouldn't be spending any money out on food right now, or that 3 a.m. DoorDash,
Yeah.
expenditure, because right now I'm trying to get things back in line because I've gotten off course. That's an okay thing to do. during a season of your life. I've had seasons of my life where, we had to scale way back for a period of time. It wasn't forever
Mm-hmm.
in order to get things back in line. And then we, had the freedom again to start looking and exploring other things.
Right. It's almost like it's having the discipline to say I need to scale back here.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like slingshots you forward, and then eventually, almost inevitably, you'll get to the point where you're going to be able to spend more
Yeah,
because you're budgeting out your money in a better way.
correct.
And then you don't have to feel bad about when you like go out and have, dinner with friends, or go on a trip with friends, or, go buy this thing you've wanted for a really long time, right? Because okay, my other dollars here, they have a purpose, and I'm covered here,
Yeah,
right? So this money's just my go have fun money. You don't have to feel like guilty about it, or like
that's the job you gave that money.
exactly, right. You don't
Mhm.
have to, and you don't have to stress about it either, being like, oh, I'm going to make this purchase, but then I got to figure out what I'm going to do for groceries. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And so that's a really easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But,
Yep.
you know, for our people, that are making a little bit more money, it tends to be the same thing though. Like the more money you make, the more money you spend.
That's what they call lifestyle creep,
Yep.
where if you start making more money, sometimes we begin to elevate our lifestyle and coincide, and we feel like we're still in the same spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that discipline of saying, just because this is going up, maybe I'm still content with where we are. I don't necessarily have to
Right.
buy the next bigger and better shiny thing.
Exactly.
Or I can just plan for it and do it later if I'm going to save for it, which is, another episode, right? But that tends to be statistically what happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Patience and self-control are so important when it comes to the spending jar.
It is.
Yeah.
Very much so.
It's huge.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Were you about to talk about emotions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead. Yep.
Yep. That was exactly where my brain went to.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Emotional spending is very, very, especially now, is very, very common.
The
Yeah, you just
struggle
open my
is
phone-
real.
Yes. Just open my phone, go to Amazon, be like, oh, I'm going to buy this, and this. You don't even need to go to the store anymore. But they call it like, shoot, I forget, like therapy spending or therapy buying or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Emotional spending.
yeah, but so like I have a few friends who say like they go out and they're like, dang, I had a hard week, so like I just went out and like bought myself a new pair of shoes or something like that, right?
Yes.
So it's really important to find other things to find
To help.
with the emotions, that instead of spending all of your money, because it can really screw you over, especially because life is a hard thing.
It is.
And so
it is. Yep. And just the thoughts in our brain that go off are, well, I'm just go out and buy these shoes. I'll worry about it later.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then later comes and you're like, why'd I buy the pair of shoes?
Yep. I've been there many times.
Yes.
Many times. I'm like, oh, I can buy this now because I have this money here. But then something else comes up in my life and the money goes elsewhere, and I'm like, oh, probably shouldn't have bought that pair of shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's happened to me more than I'd like to admit. I'm sure it's happened to you more than you'd like to admit. It happens to all of us, right?
It does.
But just making decisions, based on your own personal convictions, with self-control, and be patient, because just because you want something doesn't mean you can't have it.
You can plan for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But planning for it's so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you don't want to do is, like I said, you don't want to do this where you're like, I have half the money to do it in my spending right now, and still can take care of myself with the rest of my spending, my groceries and utilities,
Rent
all that
and
stuff.
utilities. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to take some of it out of my savings. And then, like 2 weeks ago, I got in a car accident. Then your car gets totaled, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, now that money that I just took from there could have gone to a new car, but now it's not going to a new car, right?
Right.
And so then it's almost like you're starting from square one again.
Right.
And so just having the little bit of patience can really, really set you up.
Which is also why we're saying, if you're giving dollars jobs, know what those jobs are, and don't fire those dollars from that job. prioritize that. And if there's a new job that some future dollars need, prioritize it for that. But don't keep, switching jobs with your dollars.
Right. It
You know,
starts getting real messy. And then your spending and your budget starts to control you more than you start to control your budget.
exactly.
And then again, it just takes like, if sometimes it gets super out of hand, it just takes a hard reset. And you're like, dang, like I lost it there for a little bit. All right.
All right,
I'm gonna be a
reset.
little bit more frugal right now and reset,
Yep.
But it doesn't really matter what age you are. You can start doing this at 16, 36, 76,
Yeah,
Um
doesn't matter. Yeah, I can tell you a story. For call him Marcus. He was in his early 30s, and I remember sitting down with him. We were just talking about. He came and he said, I'm struggling. I gotta, I'm going to be getting married. Want to have a family. My finances are a disaster. I need help. Basically was the gist. And so we sat down and just had a real open conversation. Great guy. And, he was also in the midst of thinking about changing jobs at the time. And his thing is that by the 20th of the month, he was always broke,
mm,
and so there was more month at the end of the money.
yeah.
And so we just talked about the 5-jar principle. We just went through and just talked about in principle, kind of the idea behind it. And so he said, okay. So we got down and we just started to map out a plan, and he started just dividing up and giving his dollars jobs. He started doing it. And within 6 months of just starting to do that, he came to me in the 5th month. I remember he's like, I just realized, he said, in 30 days, I'm gonna have enough. I'm gonna be out of debt. I said, that's awesome, Marcus. I mean, that's awesome. And so he was not only out of debt, he says, I'm actually going to have money set aside in savings too. I'm actually going to have some extra money. And like, it just like all the epiphanies and like the stars started to realign for him, and he started to see
Mm-hmm.
there's actually hope. And I think that's the thing that gives me the most satisfaction when helping people walk through this who need it, is the hope. And as the light bulbs and the epiphanies go off, that they feel like something that they've felt
Mm-hmm.
was impossible was now possible just by making some simple changes.
Right.
It wasn't as hopeless as he thought. He thought, 2-3 years is going to take me to turn anything around. And within 6 months, he already saw the shift happening.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, he never looked back. And he said, I think he said something to the effect of, I've never had so much peace when it came to money as I do right now.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the satisfaction of what we do, in one sense, when helping people get their life back on track. And now it's been 2 or 3 years since then, and Marcus has invested. He actually has money set aside in 401ks and, for retirement, and like his life, and he has 2 children, and like his life is now expanded, and he is stuck with that pattern because he saw the power in it, and it changed his life. And so, that's just one of many stories, but that's, for me, I think, it's what brings me a lot of satisfaction in seeing people's lives change like that.
Yeah. No, that's huge.
Yeah.
And so like people that are in his situation that might be
Mhm.
listening, like just ask yourself, if I have $100 to spend this week, realistically, like what do you feel like if you spent, what do you feel like you would be most fulfilled in spending that money on,
Mhm.
So I think this is a very good question to ask yourself. So like if you think about it, like is it experiential? Like is it something that you want to go do, right? Is it getting a gift for somebody? Is it, buying yourself a little extra treat at the store?
Mhm.
$100 treat's pretty expensive, but partially on a treat at the store, but
Mhm.
or a carton of eggs, like
Two
I was
two
saying.
two cartons of eggs.
Yeah, two
Yeah.
cartons of
Yeah.
eggs. Yeah,
Mhm.
no. Yeah, if you want 3, you probably got to do a reverse mortgage on your home. Yeah, that's
Right. Yeah, and the thing of it is too is, if you're just starting and just saying, take a look at your expenses from just the last 3 or 4 days, and just look at what you spent, and maybe just evaluate and say, this one was absolutely necessary, this one wasn't. Just evaluate, and then just start asking yourself, okay, if I'm going to start taking control here over my finances, start getting things in tow, what percentage can you allocate to the jar? Find out what your expenses are per month. How much of your income are you living on? 50%, 70%? Really?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much do you really need in that spending jar to take care of your rent and your groceries, your utilities? Maybe just set aside the wants just for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
just to evaluate what actually you need in expenditures and see if you can start there. How much money's left over? Because then in the coming weeks, as we go through the other jars, you might find you are able to contribute to some of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, automate some of those bills that are coming out each month that you have to do, when the gas bill's going to come out, when the cell phone, those things. Add that up and get yourself into a percentage and just start a discipline of giving those dollars the job to do those things and start there. And then from there, keep watching, and then we can expand out further from there. But that's the first step I would do.
Yeah.
And, there are tools out there. There's a company, You Need a Budget, YNAB, YNAB, that has a software you can get that can help you budget and so you can see where things are going. You can use your Notes app. I don't know if Mint is still. I think Mint has MINT has a app out there for helping with that. I believe, and there are some free tools out there. There are some that do have a small cost, but there are tools that you can use to do this, if that would be helpful. Some people have minds where they need to see it in a spreadsheet, and some people don't. But so there's something out there that you can find that would be helpful to how you approach or need to see. It helps kind of give you a benchmark or a way of monitoring.
Yeah.
But just start there and add it up, and don't be afraid. To find out that, oh my gosh, maybe it does feel like a disaster, but within a very short amount of time, if you just start implementing these principles, you will begin to see change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's really true. I
Yep.
think the scariest part is just not knowing. And then once you do actually take a look at it and you start to know your actual situation, it almost brings like some sort of peace, because you're like, that even if you're in a bad situation, you're like, dang, I'm in a rough situation,
mhm,
but now I can actually start, addressing it
mhm.
and
I don't need these
changing it.
subscriptions really,
Right.
but this is really my expenditures. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Would you say that, if like, for somebody who is in a really tight situation, that, as we go through these 5 jars, would the spending jar kind of like be the first thing to address?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Or even for anyone,
Mhm.
would
I
spending
think
jar.
so. Yeah, find out what your lifestyle actually needs to be,
Mhm.
where it's really at. Um, and if you're young, let's say, I would say, let's say you're a 15 or 16-year-old person out there who's, got their first part-time job, or first or second. And, you just been taking your check and just going and spending it with your friends, which normal thing to do. Most disposable income
right.
demographic, young people.
Mm-hmm.
And just a challenge I'd give you. See if you could take 50% of what you make, just take half, and use that for your money to spend with your friends, or whatever priorities your parents have given you, whether you're paying for your car insurance or whatever you have to do in your life, just making half of that your expenditure money, and use the other half for some of the other things we'll talk about in the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm.
See if you can start with that and see how it goes. Okay? Maybe you start with 40. Maybe you start with 30, but just see if you can do some sort of a lower percentage and give yourself the ability to give those other dollars a different job. And in 6 months to a year, see where you'd be. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
Where,
I can attest to you youngsters out there, that you know what, you can actually live on a lot less than what you think.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I did that
Mm-hmm.
when I was about
Would
that
you say
age
it worked
too.
well for you to do
I'd
that?
say it did work well. It
Mhm.
did. Yeah, it did. So, okay. So next week
Mhm.
we're gonna talk about the savings jar.
Yeah.
But before we go, make sure that you ask yourself some of these questions that we're, proposing, because, I mean, even if you are in a really good financial situation, awesome, it's great, but it's always good, like we say, to reevaluate and
Absolutely.
check it out. if you're somebody who's younger, 16, 17, this is a great time to start.
Build a good foundation.
Build a good foundation. If you're in your, 30s, 40s, and you're like, I'm not really where I want to be,
Mm-hmm.
do it as well.
Yep. And if you're extremely wealthy, this is a good thing to do as well, because you might find extra dollars that you can repurpose to other places for
Exactly.
investments or other things that you are doing. Other
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, you might find extra dollars that you can do to help expand your business, hire a new employee,
Mhm.
so many different things.
Yeah.
So no matter what stage of life people are in or what demographic, this can be very helpful.
Yeah. So one, check to see spending jar specifically. Can I live on less than I'm actually living on right now?
Mm-hmm.
Split up your needs and wants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then be like, these are my needs. You can even give yourself a little bit of want money and then see, hey, how much more can I contribute to the other jars? And then start there.
Yep.
Right. And then ask yourself, if I could spend $100 this week, for that would make me feel the most fulfilled.
Yep.
What would that be? And really be honest with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that can kind of take out a lot of the wants that you think are there.
Right.
And start there, I'd say.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. So next episode, the spending jar. We'll talk about all the nuances of that too, and the power of being a saver and what that can afford for you in your future as well.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to it.